Imagine standing in a muddy French field in 1944, armed with nothing but a bicycle pump, a 93-pound rubber balloon shaped like a Sherman tank, and the sudden, terrifying realization that a very real German panzer division is heading straight for you. This wasn't some tragic, desperate blunder in the making, at least not intentionally, but rather the carefully planned opening act of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit the Pentagon had quietly built using painters, actors, and advertising executives instead of battle-hardened soldiers. These 1,100 artists and designers were shipped off to the muddy front lines of Europe with zero armor and a single mandate: to put on a grand, dangerous show, relying entirely on theatrical illusions to survive when one stray bullet could literally deflate their entire defense. Their primary weapon of choice was a massive fleet of highly detailed inflatable rubber vehicles, including dummy tanks, artillery guns, and troop transport trucks that looked terrifyingly menacing from a distance, but were actually held up by nothing more than pressurized air and sheer hope. If a German reconnaissance plane flew overhead, the pilots would look down and see what appeared to be a massive, terrifyingly organized armored division ready to strike, completely unaware they were actually looking at a glorified, military-grade bouncing castle. But while these rubber decoys could easily fool a camera from 5,000 feet, they possessed a glaring, physics-defying flaw that threatened to expose the entire illusion the moment a scout plane flew away, and the ground became a witness. How do you make a 93-pound rubber tank look like a 30-ton steel monster when it doesn't leave a single scratch on the earth? That was the immediate, high-stakes puzzle Captain Ralph Ingersoll and his team had to solve if they wanted to keep their men alive. A real, heavily armored Sherman tank violently tears up the terrain, leaving massive, deep, muddy ruts that German reconnaissance officers actively scanned the fields for to confirm the presence of heavy Allied vehicles. Therefore, the creative minds of the Ghost Army had to manually ride bulldozers and tractors through the fields, painstakingly carving fake tank tracks that led directly to their inflatable camps to complete the visual lie. They even calculated the exact turning radius of a real 30-ton steel tank, ensuring that every single fake track curved at the mathematically correct angle so that suspicious German analysts wouldn't spot the fraud. But physical tracks were only half the battle, because a German scout on the ground might look closely at where those tracks ended and realized there were no oil leaks, no broken branches, and absolutely no discarded ration tins. So Arthur Shilstone and the other artists spent hours painting realistic shadows, scattering fake debris, and splashing dirty water onto the rubber hulls. But they knew that modern armies don't just hunt with their eyes, and the air was about to get incredibly loud. If the Germans couldn't see the truth through the trees, they would certainly try to hear it, meaning the Ghost Army had to figure out how to make a silent rubber village sound like a roaring engine of mechanical destruction. To pull off this acoustic miracle, the military turned to the brilliant sound engineers at Bell Labs, who recorded the clanking, grinding sounds of actual tanks and mixed them into a highly classified, state-of-the-art sonic library. These custom-designed soundtracks were pressed onto massive, theater-sized 16-inch records and played through enormous 500-pound speakers mounted on the backs of armored cars to project the sound directly toward the enemy lines. The resulting sound design was so incredibly loud and precise that it could make it sound like a massive division was crossing a turbulent river at night from over 15 miles away. But playing these roaring soundtracks in the dead of night was a massive, terrifying gamble, as the speakers drew so much power that a single short circuit could plunge the entire unit into dead, absolute silence. Yet, even if the sound design was flawless, it wouldn't mean a thing if the enemy's radio operators intercepted the airwaves and found nothing but dead silence where a massive army should be talking. How do you fake a massive military radio network when every real operator in the world has a completely unique way of tapping out Morse code? The Ghost Army had to master this invisible art, or watch their entire illusion crumble in an instant. A radio operator's tapping rhythm is known in the business as their fist, and seasoned German intelligence officers could easily recognize the distinct fists of specific Allied operators they had been tracking for months. Therefore, the Ghost Army's radio team had to meticulously study and mimic the exact tapping style and speed of real operators from other divisions, creating a phantom web of radio traffic that sounded identical to the real thing. They would transmit fake orders, complain about fictional weather, and gossip about non-existent officers, completely convincing the German listing posts that massive forces were shifting along the front. It was a brilliant, three-layered masterpiece of sight, sound, and radio wave trickery. A perfect, seamless trap that worked so incredibly well, it began to backfire on the Americans themselves, because as it turned out,
Fooling the enemy was relatively simple, but trying to control a giant, terrifying lie in the middle of a chaotic war zone meant that friendly forces were about to walk right into their own trap.
The problem with creating a flawless illusion of a massive, heavily armed division is that your allies are going to believe it too, especially when they are fighting for their lives in the next sector over. Real American units nearby, completely unaware of the Ghost Army's top-secret existence, would look across the field, see a massive armored division next to them, and decide they were safe to withdraw. So, it would pack up and retreat, unintentionally leaving the defenseless artists and the rubber tanks completely exposed to whatever German units were lurking in the woods. Even worse, the incredibly realistic fake radio traffic occasionally did its job too well, drawing heavy, devastating German artillery fire right onto the coordinates of the men holding the rubber props. During these terrifying barrages, Captain Ralph Ingersoll's men couldn't shoot back, nor could they run away and reveal the bluff, forcing them to huddle in muddy trenches with nothing but theater makeup and canvas for cover. Oh, and it gets stranger. Some of the artists were so committed to the bit that they would put on fake badges, wander into local French cafes, and loudly leak confidential gossip to suspected German spies. This bizarre mix of high-stakes theater and sudden violent artillery strikes was about to face its ultimate test along the Rhine River, where the lives of 30,000 real soldiers depended on a massive final bluff. In March 1945, the Allied High Command handed the Ghost Army their most terrifying assignment yet. They had to pretend to be the entire Ninth Army, drawing German forces away from the actual crossing point of the Rhine. With the real Ninth Army quietly preparing to cross 10 miles away, Captain Ralph Ingersoll's 1,100 men set up hundreds of inflatables, blasted their sonic trucks, and flooded the radio waves with massive troop movements. They were outnumbered nearly 30-1, standing in the open with absolutely no real armor, acting as a giant, shiny target designed to invite a massive, desperate German counterattack. Yet, the Germans bought the performance completely, shifting several battle-hardened divisions and directing their artillery barrage away from the real assault to destroy what they thought was a massive Allied force. Because of this tactical masterclass, the real Ninth Army crossed the Rhine with almost zero casualties, pulling off one of the most successful river crossings of the entire war. But as the war in Europe drew to a close, and the exhausted artists prepared to receive their hard-earned praise, they were met not with medals and parades, but with a sudden, chilling ultimatum from their own government. How do you tell 1,100 men who just helped win a world war that they must immediately pretend they did absolutely nothing of importance? That was the cold reality the Ghost Army faced the moment they returned home. Instead of marching in victory parades, Arthur Shilstone and his comrades were stripped of their records, forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, and threatened with treachery's charges if they ever spoke a single word about their service. They couldn't tell their wives, their children, or their future employers what they had actually done in Europe, leaving many of them to live for decades with the awkward reputation of having spent the war doing boring clerical work. So these brilliant artists quietly returned to civilian life, design studios, and advertising agencies, keeping one of the greatest military secrets in history buried deep within their own minds. But the true mystery wasn't just why their story was kept secret during the war, but why the Pentagon continued to lock their files away in a secure vault for over 50 years after the shooting had stopped. What was the Pentagon so terrified of that they couldn't let anyone know about a bunch of rubber tanks and sound recorders? The answer lies in the shifting sands of the newly emerging Cold War. The military realized that tactical projection and psychological deception were going to be the ultimate weapons in the looming, shadow-filled standoff against the Soviet Union. Therefore, the pioneering techniques developed by Captain Ralph Ingersoll's art students became the highly classified top-secret foundation of modern American psychological operations. Revealing how a tiny group of artists had successfully fooled the entire German army would have shown Moscow exactly how the American military's magician performed his favorite tricks. But after 50 long years of absolute silence, a ticking clock and a group of aging veterans finally forced the government's hand, leading to an extraordinary emotional reckoning in the mid-1990s. In 1996, the Pentagon finally declassified the records of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, allowing a group of frail elderly men to finally sit down with their families and reveal their incredible secret. Suddenly, historians had to rewrite the logistics of several major World War II battles, realizing that some of the most critical defensive gaps of the war were held not by steel, but by the sheer, terrifying audacity of artists playing pretend. The true weapon of the Ghost Army wasn't rubber or recorded sound, it was their profound understanding of human perception, proving that in the grand theater of war, a well-staged lie can save just as many lives as a loaded gun, even if you have to wait half a century to take your bow.
And this is just one story among countless mysteries history left behind. Subscribe, and let's keep uncovering them together. And if this one got you thinking, a like or a share helps more curious minds find it.